Yeah.
Sure.
That really is. I mean, I didn't grow up in a church-going family. I think we seldom even went on Easter. And so my experience was hunting for Easter eggs early in the morning. It was only much later that actually going to church became part of my experience of Easter.
And then on Sunday, there's this thing, you talk about celebration, Shaun, and in the townships and more so, it's a time where people, see a lot of singing from different churches in the streets, and then going to the graves, in the morning and singing. The mantra is "He's risen." He's all sorts of songs that get to be sung.
Welcome everybody, this is Blaque Nubon, and you're currently listening to the Gospel Coalition Africa podcast, and I'm joined by two special guests today on the podcast, and you might know both of them. One is part of the council members of the Gospel Coalition Africa, and one is famous for being an expositor. So I'm not going to do justice, obviously, and you can see with my bad introduction, I'd rather have them introduce themselves. So gentlemen, welcome first and foremost.
Thanks,
to the podcast. So we'll probably start off with Ndaba. If you could please just tell us who you are, where you're from, a bit about your family, and what you get your hands dirty with from day to day.
Thank you, Blaque. So it's a pleasure to be here, and my name is Ndaba Mazabane, currently serving as an associate pastor at Rosebank Union Church. It will be my 13th year this year since we have been part of the pastoral team there. Married to Maggie, and we are blessed with grown-up children, 2 boys and a girl, and so we live in Johannesburg, and I'm also part of the Gospel Coalition Africa Council.
That's good. And Shaun, if you could please do the same for us.
Yeah, hi Blaque. So Ndaba, great to be with you guys. My name is Shaun Storer, and I'm a member at C4 Church, which is in Bryanston, Johannesburg. I'm involved in, a few different things, but mostly it's around training. So training people for ministry, and then also doing workplace ministry. So just taking the Bible into the workplace with people to read it with them. And so that's what I spend most of my time doing. I'm married to Tanith, and I have 2 children, a son, Cade, who's 10, and my daughter, Tyne, who's 8.
Yeah, that's cool, man. So if you haven't obviously read the title of this podcast, we're speaking about Easter, and it's a big festival, or big holiday, rather, in our country. Could you guys please just tell us what is Easter? What is Easter all about? If I was a Martian and I just landed on planet Earth, and it's April, and I'm seeing everybody going crazy, and they tell me about this thing called Easter. Maybe Shaun, if you would start us off and just tell us what is Easter, what it's about.
I guess the answer to that question would be depends on who you ask. So if you had to, if you're asking me as a Christian, then Easter's it's that one weekend in the year, I guess, where we remember what I would describe as the most important, the most powerful event that has ever happened in creation, in the history of the world. So it looks back at the death and resurrection of Jesus, and it's a time to remember that, So I think it's the most important weekend for Christians in many ways. Because, as I say, it's the most important thing that's ever happened. It's really the climax. It's the fulfillment. It's the of everything that God has planned and promised to do happened on that weekend, and that's what we're remembering.
I think on a more natural way, Easter, if you were to come from another planet, you would see many people going up and down. And it's a it's a holiday for most people. There's a lot of movement taking place. People migrating from workplaces, and those who have come from villages and places outside town. It's an opportunity for them to go back home. I mean, you would see, and I think it is true not only in South Africa, but could be true in the rest of Africa in some cases, that this movement from urban areas to the villages, and you'd see stocks of cars and busloads of people, trucks, and so it is on the face of it, it is just this huge movement. But behind it also, as Shaun has said, it's a wonderful moment in history, as we recall and remember how God had loved the world in such a way that he had given the world his son to die for us. And so there's that element. There is also an element of commercialization in it, because such a lot of commercial activity takes place during this particular time. But it's also, it's a time when families come together and churches band together. It's interesting, it's probably second to Christmas. I don't know, Shaun, we might batch it here. I don't know which one is more, but I think those two in particular are such notable in the calendar of most countries, Easter and Christmas. So it's that type of...
I think, that's definitely an interesting thing in South Africa.
Yeah.
Where I think, with Western culture, I think Christmas, culturally speaking, Christmas is bigger than Easter for people living in South Africa from a Western point of view. Sure. Easter time, especially in a place like Johannesburg, people want to get out of the city. Yeah. As Ndaba was saying, there's this movement of people, and for many sort of middle class and let's say white families, it's a move to the sea. Yeah, yeah. It's a weekend to get away from the madness. And in that sense, that's the commercial side of it. It's sea and Easter eggs in a chocolate. That's what it's, and family. So I think that's also true, that it's seen as a time to be with your family. Whereas I guess from a more African culture, instead of a time to get away, it's a time to gather. And I think that's quite a significant difference in how people deal with Easter in South Africa. Yeah.
And I think just to add also another thing, it Africa being so incurably religious, as I say, there's a lot of religious activities taking place during Easter, and it's interesting that even people who don't normally attend church, at some point in that weekend, there's a place and time for church activity, and so it does bring that spirituality and the spiritual side for people who may not necessarily during the course of the year think more about church, but it's an opportunity to gather. I mean, come to think of it, I was just thinking as I was driving to the studio here, thinking, we don't have normally what we may call a Christmas conference, but we do have Easter conferences happening in many churches.
There's a lot of tents now that are popping up in townships. Yeah, sure. And that's actually an interesting thing. At least a lot of people talk about it. Just double tapping on what you guys are saying, that during Easter particularly, churches are filled across the country. So I mean, you guys might have mentioned other reasons, but if we could probably just maybe zoom into that. Do you think that there's any other specific reasons that even people who don't go to church during Easter would flock to church? I mean, if I even use my own family as an example, my mother doesn't go to church. But religiously on Easter, she'd call me, and I work for a church, but she would call me to ask me if I'm going to church during Easter, because that's when she wants to go to church. So are there any other reasons you guys might think of, know of, why you think people are just moved to go to church during Easter?
Yeah, again, I think there's no one answer that covers, in South Africa, it's such a varied thing. So I think, for instance, in sort of, again, if you look at more middle class areas, I think that's actually declining. So I think you're getting fewer and fewer people who are even just going to church at Easter time. Probably, I don't know for sure, but I would think even more are going at Christmas time than at Easter. So if anything, Easter's maybe dropping off even quicker than Christmas. And I guess those who go, I think the main driving thing at the moment is just that Christian background somewhere. It's out of a sense of that somewhere in my mind, this is who I am, even if they're not actually converted.
Mm. I think on one level it shows also the power of tradition, and I think because it has been part and parcel of either of our upbringing or the influence, particularly of Christianity in most of our countries in Africa, including South Africa, it becomes part and parcel, basically. But I think also it's really a time where people, because of the significance of it, whether people fully understand and are gripped by the intensity of the death of Christ, whether they do that or not. But I do believe that there are others who really use it as a time to seek to connect with God. I mean, almost like, here's a moment, I've been busy since Christmas, it's a time for me to connect with this God, so it is certainly in the main, really, it is a spiritual event. It is a soul-searching event in many ways, and I do think that some people take it seriously as a kind of spiritual stock-taking type of a thing, where you want to reconnect with God and think more about church, your relationship with God, and all of those things. So look, it gets to be wrapped up on Monday, Tuesday, and then let's start again and think about it on Christmas when Christ, would be born.
Yeah, and I think that the nature of Easter is different as well, in that it's a whole weekend, isn't it? If you compare it to Christmas. Christmas is one day, Christmas Day, go to church, done. Whereas weekend is this, like Easter is this whole weekend of, and it really is reflecting on profound things. And I just wonder if, as Ndaba says, it is a time for people to think, maybe, where am I with God, to think spiritually. But I wonder even if our culture less and less has the capacity to even want to reflect so deeply on something so profound. And I guess there's a danger for churches maybe in the desire to use Easter as an opportunity to reach non-believers, that we lose we want to be evangelistic, and you kind of lose the enormity of what you're actually considering on Easter weekend. Even just, I wonder how many, you look back into church history, and in many traditions there's a build up to Easter even. There's stuff that comes before that prepares people for Easter. Whereas now it's kind of just, it's this like rushed long weekend, and we just cram a whole lot of things in, and we hope that we'll draw some people in and they'll hear the gospel and those are great things. But I just wonder if we're not maybe losing something along the way.
How would you encourage, let's say, a minister who's listening to this and has succumbed to the temptation of downplaying just the importance of the message, particularly that you guys have been hammering on about Easter? Last year or 2 years ago, I went to a church in Joburg, big church in Joburg, and I got there, and we sang, I think, 14 songs, and no gospel was preached, and we just left. So they said, we'll get pamphlets at the door if you want to know more about why they're so happy, and there was a pamphlet about the church, but nothing about the cross, nothing about Christ, nothing about the resurrection, nothing about the significance of that weekend. So if there's a minister who's listening to this, who's probably just close to falling for that temptation, what would your words be?
My advice obviously would be, this is the greatest opportunity for the church. It's almost like it's a time when people are kind of even vulnerable in many respects. And because there's hype and activities, and some of them may be gravitating to things that are immaterial, but how can the church really capitalize on a holiday and holy season like this one? I think one, I would say, to avoid the hype. I mean, it's very difficult sometimes to avoid the hype and pack the church with so many sometimes meaningless activities. Just you want to fill the weekend, you just want to do it. But I think if Easter is planned, properly, and you think it through, run it through with your teams, and then see then how you can really capitalize, because I think it's an opportune moment for gospel message to be as clear as possible. Because can you think about the death of Jesus Christ? I mean, why did he die, and all those kind of things? And it brings home then that important message of reminding people again that, beyond and above these hypes that we are seeing here, we're really talking about the greatest thing that has ever happened in the world, where someone who loved us so much, God himself sent his one and only Son, Jesus Christ, to come in this world, to die for sinners, people who were against him, people who didn't love him, people who were far removed for him. And willingly, Christ died on the cross for us. He took our sins, and at the cross, we see him taking the enormity of sin upon him. Now, I think one thing to avoid also, and we'll probably pick it up even as we go forward, it's avoiding what is often can become also a tradition. Things like the 7 words have got to be, in some churches, and I don't know if it's Shaun, you need to visit some of these churches. I mean, the 7 words are a big thing, and yes, I think it's a good reminder, but I think the temptation is just to have these 7 words just almost like recited without good biblical exposition, and they just become. If you go to a typical traditional African church, the emotions that are in the kind of preaching that goes with that, and Blaque might bear me out here, but sometimes you need to stop and say, hey, what is happening here? And even help people to pause, and it's not just like the Lord's Prayer, which get to be recited when you do it, but it is thinking about and reflecting and challenging people, obviously, to the claims of Christ.
Yeah, I think I think what you're saying is so important, Ndaba, that there's almost a sense in which we almost got to try and use Easter weekend as a time to slow down, help people to slow down, and almost I guess also feel the weekend. So, the Friday, which really does focus on the death of Christ. So I've experienced services where there's actually very little singing. There's reading, parts of Scripture, sometimes the Gospels around the death of Jesus, and then time for reflection, just to stop and think, what does this mean? And someone says a few words. Now that might make an unbeliever who's there feel uncomfortable, but you think, well, maybe that's a good thing. Let's just stop and help you think about the richness and the significance of what has just happened. And really make people aware that this is a time that Jesus died, and the significance of his death. But then Sunday is about the resurrection. And I wonder if we haven't sometimes, in our zeal for evangelism, we really do focus on the death of Christ, which of course is crucial. But do we ever get to the resurrection? So how different is the Easter Sunday service to the Friday, if you have a service on the Friday? And is there again this celebration that he's alive? And what does this mean? And again, to give just people an opportunity to reflect on that and what it means, not just for our lives but for creation, that he actually defeated death. And so I think in a sense to really think, as Ndaba says, think about, plan, how do we do this, and how do we really bring across, instead of just trying to cram it with busyness and tradition, and we've always done it this way. But
that's good. Sure. And I think that's good advice, man. People should pause and think.
Yeah.
And maybe we can pause and think now, just about our earliest memories of Easter. So if we think, what's the earliest memory of
Easter eggs.
We didn't have Easter.
Yeah. That really is. I mean, I didn't grow up in a church-going family. I think we seldom even went on Easter. And so my experience was hunting for Easter eggs early in the morning. It was only much later that actually going to church became part of my experience of Easter.
I mean, I for one, perhaps I was about 11, 12, or even 10, 11, 12, thereabout. It was, going with my mom. My dad was the kind that visit church on occasions such as Easter, Christmas, and child christening. So we had 10. So I would imagine my dad never missed those 10 because he had to be there. But yeah, so I think for me, I grew up in a more rural background. Going to town for a church service was quite it's a big occasion. It was just amazing, and the church that I attended when I grew up with my parents, it was also a time where they did several things. It's time for baptism, and for children, or could be dedication, christening, as it was called in those kind of traditions, and also a confirmation. I was not, but I don't think I was at that age at a particular time, but it's just fascinating to see how that is done at Easter, and of course it comes with having new clothes and type of a thing, and yeah, so it was actually that was embedded in my memory, because it was the first time for me to be alerted to this, and how I was lucky to have gone with my parents. I still don't know what I deserve. Maybe it was good, that year. But so those were my early memories. And then on Sunday, there's this thing you talk about, celebration, Shaun, and in the townships and more so, it's a time where people, see a lot of singing from different churches in the streets, and then going to the graves, in the morning, and singing. The mantra is "He's risen." He's all sorts of songs that get to be sung, and so it's kind of vibey, and just again that type of a reminder, and it is also a time. Concerted, so some people it's a time to wake up early in the morning to go and clean the graves and all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's actually my earliest memory. It's being at the grave. We went on Monday, so family day. So after Easter Sunday, then we'd go to the grave visit. Yeah, there was plenty of graves. And then we'd clean them, and that's what I remember about Easter. And since we're talking about families and communities, you mentioned that obviously in the township people would get different churches or different denominations would be in the streets singing. Shaun, probably in your experience, was there any communal thing that happened where or did you get like all the kids in the neighborhood to go Easter egg hunting?
Yeah, not really. And again, I think that it's the cultural difference, isn't it? That and I guess I shouldn't speak for everyone, but it was typically just go to church on Friday morning if you really are into it, or either just Sunday morning. It might be, I think, people gathering for meals, but it's more just it's not a community thing. It's maybe the family and the slightly broader family. And Easter eggs, I think, okay, keep coming back to that, but I think in some ways, if I think of my own culture, and again, I don't want to speak for the whole of my culture, I think there's almost a bit of a poverty there of it, of how we engage with Easter, and I guess the more the further and further it moves away from any sort of Christian knowledge, it's becoming more and more so, that and so I guess there is a place for certainly if I think of my own family, to think through, but what do we do with this weekend, and do we almost need to build something new from the beginning, and to turn Easter into something that is much more meaningful.
Yeah. So around Easter, it happens as well on Christmas, but Easter, at least we've seen with like a lot of young black people would go on social media and say, like, put out all these conspiracy theories and all these articles about how Easter is a pagan religion and stuff about the egg or whatever. So if somebody's listening, I mean, Shaun, you've been talking about the Easter egg, and I don't want us to go into a rabbit hole, but
See what you did there,
yeah. any interesting things about the egg and the bunny, and how did Jesus have a bunny, or what's the deal? What's the connection there?
Yeah, I try to read up a bit on this stuff a bit, and so I think that a lot of it we don't really know. Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of guessing. Even the name, people aren't really sure where does the word Easter come from. Some would say it's from sort of a pagan festival. Some are saying now that it's possibly, and Ndaba was talking about baptism, and often that was a big thing that happened even in the early church on this particular weekend, and that the name could be derived from that because they wore white, and somewhere there along the line it becomes the word Easter. So those things that like the Easter eggs and those kind of things, I think there's a sense in which I think it's unhelpful for Christians to kind of just be against those things and write them off because they may have some sort of pagan. There's a sense in which they give you connection with the culture around you, and a way to engage, and to, in a sense, to start speaking to people about the Easter weekend. So I don't think I wouldn't want to make a big deal of them. It's interesting that the Lord, it's the one big difference, isn't it, between the Old and the New Covenant, is that Israel was given they had a sort of a calendar, a religious calendar, and very sort of clear instructions about how to celebrate different things and what you must do, whereas we're not given that as Christians. There's no Christian calendar. This is tradition. Easter is a tradition. We weren't told to do it in this way. But to see it recognize also that it comes out of that Passover weekend. Yes. And even the early church, they continue to celebrate Passover, but understanding that Jesus is the fulfillment of that, what as the Passover remembered the Exodus. So I think there's real value in holding on to these things, and that they are a way of remembering, and they are a way of engaging with our culture. But sometimes, those are often a difficult. How do you keep those without losing the essence of it? So
that's good. I think it was mentioned earlier on that I think it was you, Shaun, as well, who spoke about in some way is trying to create a new tradition for your own family. So looking at your immediate family and saying, maybe we should try and inject new life into this weekend and kind of give it true meaning and redefine a couple of things. What have you guys done as family men for your families? Have you taken some of those habits or traditions that you guys used to partake in your families and communities and brought that into your immediate family, or you've created something new? And this might be free advice for somebody who's out there and who's looking for a new package.
Yeah, well, I think from my side, not necessarily original, but I think it's our time is, I guess, being part of the pastoral team, church attendance and participation has always been a thing that, as a family, we all go together. Shaun said it earlier on, and then after church we do, especially when the kids were small, the Easter egg hidden in the garden, and then for them to hunt those was one of the fun that we used. I think it was just because it's part of that, and it had not necessarily a biblical meaning for them. It was just to keep them kind of interested and things like that. But I think on it's for every family. It is important really that your devotions, your reading of scripture, the passages that relates to Easter in particular. It was almost like earlier on was knocking the 7 words, but I think it's also important just to bring them into context with your family. Just say, well, these were the significant words which was said by someone who died for us, and what do they mean for us today? So just to have that time of relaxing, that time of just like we do on a Christmas day, just or around that time, just reading passages that relate to this. And I don't think I have any rocket science event that we do as a family, but we seek to renew our commitment to Christ and see him who died for us, and make our own commitments to seek to follow him closely.
That's good. For you, Shaun?
Yeah, so very similar actually. So for again being at church, and of course going on a Friday and a Sunday, your children, especially younger children, they want to know why, and so it's an opportunity to talk about that. And I think there's something in that a lot of their friends have gone away on a holiday, and I think there's something to be said to say to your children, well, for this weekend we want to be with God's people, not away from God's people, because it is such an important weekend. So that, not that was a kind of an intentional, it was part of the job, we had to be there, but to use it to say this is an important weekend. And I think also, especially when my kids were younger, leading up to Easter, just to read the Easter story, for them, and maybe as they get older, I guess, is just to around the Easter time, is to just start talking about what happened, and just keep make it part of the discussion as much as possible. That's about as much as it is at the moment, I think, for us. Yeah.
And just before we get into final words, I think Ndaba mentioned it a couple of times, but for those who don't know the 7 words.
Yes. On the spot, Ndaba.
Yeah, well, Shaun is going to help me. He's an expositor. But I mean, it's words such as, Father, forgive them, they know not what they are doing, and Jesus to John, saying, John, look after. Oh, what is it about your mother? And it is. Now you put me on a spot about the 7 words. I captured in the Gospels, really.
It's like, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Exactly, it's one of those. And but I think, I mean, all those words are words that are significant on their own, because they for an example, the thief on the cross, or 2 thieves actually, but the one who Jesus said to him, today you'll be me in paradise. So again, looking at the forgiveness that Christ had on this man who deserved death and nothing else. So you can take a word like that and think about the importance of just handing over your life to Christ, and knowing that when our lives, even as we live today, there is still eternity for us, and there is still a life beyond the life that we have here. Just like the promise Jesus made to this thief on the cross and said, today you'll be with me in paradise. So heaven and paradise are not a pie in the sky. It's a reality. It is the fact that we will be with him forever. And so those are the kind of things that I think it's so important to kind of reflect and think more and more as you read them afresh. Obviously, not just only during Easter, but these are the words that Jesus said that we need to be reminding ourselves, but also in the context of all what the Gospels actually are saying, rather than just isolating them and putting them aside to the full story. I mean, so again, Easter should be a time to look at the God's plan of salvation in its totality, from being translated from darkness into light, and this is the path that we take, going forward.
And I would say even broader than that, from creation to new creation. That it really is the center of the big story of God's plan for the world.
And those were the last famous 7 words. Do you guys have any last words you want to share with somebody who's listening to this? There's people in different African countries. Ministers might be listening to this. Non-believers might be listening to this.
But I can only encourage, particularly my fellow pastors, leaders in the church, that we have an opportunity during Easter, starting with Good Friday, and some may start even Sunday, the past Sunday with the Palm Sunday, and all of just this build up. That let's put Christ as the focus. The gospel as a message, and grace really as a platform for many people who are seeking to know Christ. Like Paul preached nothing else but Christ during this time. And to someone who just listened to this podcast who may not fully comprehend this, we really encourage you during this time to find a church, or go to a church, and particularly a church where Christ is proclaimed and the gospel is shared. And if needs be, even after church, don't rush home. Speak to someone who could help you to understand the meaning and the message of Easter. To someone in particular, I'm burdened with those who have forsaken their first love for Christ. And I encourage you, wherever you may be listening this day, that use this as an opportunity for you to renew your commitment to Christ and make it seriously going forward. Maybe a reminder to you that in the Easter 2019 was a time where I really just thought about my life and start where I had fallen, and by the grace of God, hand over my life and seek to continue. So those are just some of the things that I would encourage, different people who might be at different places in their own lives. And for families, obviously, it's a wonderful opportunity to gather together. And for each one of us who know Christ, let's represent him well.
Amen, amen, amen. Mr. Shaun?
Yeah, I think I'd say to people, where if they feel that religion, tradition sort of has started to, it's made them skeptical about Easter or disinterested in it. I'd just say you need to look past that stuff and just realize that this is truly the most important thing that has ever happened, and that this is God doing everything that He's promised to do, and setting the destiny of our world. And the invitation of God is that He wants to make you part of His story. He wants to bring you into what He is doing through the death and resurrection of Jesus. And if you don't believe that, you need to at least consider it, because it is that significant and that important. So, as Ndaba said, find a place, a church where someone's going to explain that to you and help you understand what Christmas is actually about. So look past all the stuff that might be happening, but what does it actually mean? That's the most important thing anyone will ever do.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Really appreciate you guys. Really appreciate all your thoughts. And as you're listening to this, hope you're encouraged, and hope that you will find a church if you're not part of one, and actually spend this weekend the way that we believe God wants it to be spent, listening to the truth about His Word and what He's accomplished through His Son. So thank you so much for tuning in again to the Gospel Coalition Africa podcast. My name is Blaque Nubon. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.